everyone. So my name is Karen, and kind of to give a little bit of rundown of how this will go is I'll be introducing all the panelists, and then we'll have we have some pre-curated questions that I'll be kind of facilitating the conversation amongst the panelists. We'll be passing those around. And then at the end, before we wrap up, between like 8:45, we'll start answering some audience questions and start wrapping up. A bit about me. I go to the University of Toronto. I study industrial engineering. I'm in my final year, and this past summer I did the APM internship at Google, and I'll be going back there for full time. And then now I will introduce everyone else. So the first panelist that we have is Monica. Monica is currently an associate product manager at Google. She graduated with a degree in computer science from the University of Waterloo in 2021. During her time at Waterloo, she did various internships and co-ops and is excited to share insights with the panel today. In her spare time, she loves to sing, work on music projects, eat, and explore the world. And next up, we have Diane Huang. Sorry, I didn't say Monica's last name, so I'll keep it to first names only. I'm gonna have to be consistent. Diane is a recent graduate from the commerce program at Queen's University in fall 2020. And in the past few years, she's founded 2 nonprofits, interned at Uber, Flip, Deloitte, Tesla, and Mozilla. She joined Hopin, Europe's fastest growing startup, as a product manager upon graduation and led 6 different product teams so far. She enjoys reading, hip hop music, Formula One, and traveling in her free time. She'll be joining Canva as a senior product manager in the next month to incubate a brand new team. Next, we have Jason, who specializes in forming innovative teams and cutting through red tape within large organizations. So dealing with ambiguity is tough but rewarding. The Lighthouse technology team at KPMG and the gaming and esports team at Telus has occupied his past few years, and his professional goals has always been to skate where the puck is going and to build expertise and relationships in booming industries such as gaming and esports. And then we have Lisa. Is currently an associate product manager at Nulogy. How do I pronounce that?
You got it. It's all
okay,
good.
Sorry, I wasn't sure. For some reason, thought there were extra letters. Nulogy, a B2B 2-sided platform aimed to optimize supply chain challenges for CPGs. Originally from Calgary, she graduated from the HBA program at Western University and did her first 2 years in MedSci. During university, she tried out roles in marketing, pro bono consulting, startups, and product, and her long-term goal is to work internationally and start her own business one day. Outside of work, Lisa enjoys board game nights and trying out new restaurants. And our final panelist is Allison. Allison graduated from Queen's University in 2021, this past year, and has previously worked at, 2012, sorry, correction, 2012. Not 2021, and has previously worked at McCann, American Express, CIBC, and now Wealthsimple. She joined Wealthsimple 2 years ago and has worked in the financial data team, and most recently became a senior PM and now on the Wealthsimple trade team. And yeah, those are our panelists. So we're gonna get started with the questions. So first question is, how did you decide when you wanted to be a PM? I'll pass this off to Lisa, since I see Lisa unmuted and ready to talk.
Oh, thanks. So when I decided to become a PM, is that the question?
Yeah, how did you decide you wanted to be a PM?
Yeah, so I have a very non-technical background, and I actually was really set on consulting in my undergrad. But I think what really changed when I was chatting with some people, sort of deciding between which path to go down, and they said, you need to sort of consider a little bit of your long-term goals as well. It's easy to get kind of caught up in what everyone else is doing, and I think a lot of my friends, they all went into investment banking and consulting. But I was really thinking about my own long-term goals, and I felt like product was really great because you get to sort of experience things end to end. And I want to be a founder or start my own business one day, and that really aligned with this particular goal. And I think so far, I'm so glad I made that decision.
Yeah, that's super interesting how you wanted that end-to-end experience, or just to work on something from end to end. I'm gonna popcorn this to Monica.
Yeah, for sure. So I tried out different co-ops and I really liked my product management internship simply because it was really cross-functional. And I feel like I'm the type of person who really likes to learn a bunch of really random things and then seeing how like the product is built, you interface with design, you interface with engineering, sales, marketing, all parts of a company. So I really like that aspect. And I also really like running meetings and writing emails, and that's a huge part of the job. So that's what gravitated me towards becoming a PM.
For sure. Al, oh, sorry, go on. So someone talking. Okay, that was just me then. I heard feedback. Allison, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would say when I graduated from school, yeah, since I graduated in 2012, as we all heard, I think PM is a relatively new role, especially in Toronto. And when I graduated, I had no idea what it was. And it's not something that I kind of stumbled upon a little bit later in my career. When I just think about my traits and like my personality, and I think a lot of it aligns with what PMs do. Like, I think similar to what's been said, like I get bored easily. Like I love days that have a lot of variety. I love just the context switching and doing different things. I also think PM is like inherently a leadership role where you have to like guide others, you like set a vision, and that's something I've always loved. And I've always been like super social, and I like that being a PM allows you to like accomplish things through others, and kind of inspire others and rally them behind a vision. So those are a few things that I really enjoyed about my previous role, and that's what I wanted to do in my next role, and that's how I kind of stumbled into being a PM.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious to hear from you, Jason, like what your path was kind of like.
Yeah, for sure. So I actually started off with some software engineering internships while I was in school. Decided that while it was okay, I didn't mind it. I didn't love programming all day and sort of working away straight at it. So my first job after university, I decided to go kind of opposite direction and go consulting for a bit. Did that. I liked the work. I liked kind of being all over the place and having my hands in a whole bunch of different projects. But I was still gravitating towards going back into the tech space. And so when KPMG stood up their little software engineering squad, sort of raised my hand and said, "Hey, how do I be a part of that?" And it was as a product manager on that team. And then from KPMG, I decided, you know what, I am not really loving working on tax applications. I would actually prefer to work on consumer-facing stuff. And so I made the switch over to the Telus TV team, and then more recently to the newly formed gaming and esports team at Telus. So it was really just about, following what the interests were, and that led to some pretty interesting opportunities for me.
Mm-hmm. And then finally, Diane.
Yeah, I don't think I can add anything that anybody else hasn't said, but personally, from my experience, I come from a traditional business background. So I didn't take like any technical courses or study engineering as a lot of like PM's backgrounds do have, which we don't see as typical nowadays anyways, but there wasn't really any way at Queen's for me at least to discover product management. So as a lot of it was through entrepreneurship or extracurriculars, also attending events like this one, like hackathons, to kind of hear from other people in the industry. And specifically for me too, I think like I kind of wanted to use my internships to figure out what I hated. And so like each of my internships, I made sure they were in a different industry. They were of a company of a whole different size. And I did operations, and then I did consulting, I did marketing, and then I also did PM. And I think it's like kind of a lower risk way to discover yourself through this journey while you're in school. And so for me, I think it's really came down to working with people, and then also being ambitious too, because particularly I think with PM in tech, you face a lot of ambiguous situations, and you kind of have to break that down, define it, and then really drive the team to do it. And it's not for everyone. And I feel like that was the most exciting part of the job for me. So yeah.
Yeah, it's like really cool how everyone kind of ventured into PM slightly differently, but like there were a lot of common themes in terms of like what we're really enjoying working with people, consumer facing products, like wanting that end-to-end experience. So kind of the next question is, what were some initial misconceptions about being a PM, and how has that changed since you started working full time? Like I know when I was trying to break into PM, a lot of people would give me a lot of information, and I feel like there's a little bit of like gatekeeping almost. So like, what are some misconceptions that you feel like were really debunked as you started full time? I'll pass it off to Lisa first again, because Lisa was nodding. So she seems like she has some
I'm
knowledge
just
to share.
listening to you, Karen. I'm just being a good listener. I'm kidding. I think there's a lot. I think the big one I hear a lot and I experience myself is that you make very well-informed decisions. And don't get me wrong, you do make a lot of well-informed decisions backed on data, but you make so many little decisions from a day-to-day perspective in PM that you can't always do what you think might be the most perfect scenario. So the sort of my role is in the B2B space. So we have a lot of pressure from like client commitments in addition to what we do, just building our, organic like product roadmap. So with that being said, sometimes we don't always get to prioritize things we think are like, backed pure, like we feel like, totally perfect research. Sometimes when you're writing that like PDR or product spec, you're just like, you're just meeting deadlines. So I think a lot of what you read in like product books or what you envision in product is like, a lot of times you don't actually get to do that in real life and have perfect data. You sometimes just scrap things and you make decisions best you can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's like so interesting. Because everyone always emphasizes like being really analytical and like I think data informed is a lot more of a better term rather than like data driven, which is what I've heard like other PMs quote. Diane, what are your thoughts?
I shouldn't have nodded as hardly as I did. I was like,
it's a good trait of a PM. You gotta give the visual signal.
You see, this is a PM characteristic, is doing this during meetings. Just tell your team members. No, but I really agree with Lisa. I think that's a super valid point. I think for me is like the power and learning how to influence is so important as a PM. I think there are a lot of because it's relatively like a new role, especially if you don't come from a school like Waterloo, where you might have a lot of alumni or friends you can talk to as PMs. You might think like, product manager, that's like a manager. Like you must have a lot of responsibility. You must have ownership over people, but really no, like all you're responsible for is the success of the product. And like, I think there's a misconception there is that like people don't directly report to you, but you have to learn how to influence them to get what you want. And I think like that has been a huge learning curve for me, working with all different types of people in different departments, different backgrounds. And you just have to make sure that, you're well prepared to kind of face that side of things when you don't actually have real power.
Yeah, for sure. Like influencing without authority, I think is also something that like a lot of people talk about, just because like to be a PM, to like ensure the success of a product, you really need everyone to buy into what you're trying to move forward and like ensure that they're cooperating or like able to contribute like in the way that you need them to.
And a lot of times with like broken data too, like what Lisa says, you don't have the full picture to literally push people to do it. You just like have to be creative.
Yeah, for sure. Monica, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think something that comes to mind is the fact that, a lot of people think that a product manager is a very well-defined role. They always throw that Venn diagram with like the intersection of business, design, and engineering. But I personally think the PM role is like one of the most flexible roles out there. Like you could be someone who's like almost like a data scientist or someone who's basically an engineer, but like deals a little bit with like cross-functional work. So I think, yeah, a huge surprise that came to me, especially, was that I went into full-time with only a virtual internship under my belt. And then now as a full-time person, I'm on a different team and it's completely different. Like the stuff that I do is different. The languages and docs that I write are completely different. The space and the users are the same, but there's like completely different needs. So yeah, everything is extremely team dependent and yeah, you just have to be extremely adaptable and open-minded when doing the role, I guess.
Passing it off to Jason, what are some misconceptions that you kind of faced when you initially entered the role?
I think I kind of echo what a lot of folks have already been saying about the product manager role being ill-defined is probably a bit too strong of a term, but it's almost like a catch-all for everything that someone else doesn't do. That's your problem to solve. It's a job to figure out what the move is. And I think in terms of misconceptions, for whatever reason, I always thought there would be sort of a clear line for, okay, we're going to define the requirements, we're going to prioritize, we're going to do this, that, and that. But what they don't tell you is that, hey, shit's going to hit the fan at some point, to be quite honest, and you're going to need to revisit those constantly. And there oftentimes isn't enough time in the day to do all the due diligence that you might want to do. And that's when you need to make some tough choices about, okay, I don't have the time to gather this data or to A/B test this or to do that. What's the call that I'm going to make, and how am I going to justify that with what I do have? So I think that's the piece that I actually like, because I think dealing with ambiguity is something that any good product manager should excel at. And I think that's the bit that I was surprised at how much I would need to do.
Yeah, for sure. Like lots of decision making, lots of quick decisions, and like not all the time like you can really predict the outcome. Like again, like everyone, like echoing what everyone said, like fragmented data, like quick decision making, it makes it really challenging, and like it is a very ambiguous role, that like you're dealing with like new situations as they arise rather than like having the same thing happen again and again. And then finally, Allison.
Yeah, I think maybe a couple things I would add there. I think one thing I read a lot about the PM role was the importance of empathy for your customers. So like really understanding what they were going through and how to address their problems. But I think one thing I didn't realize is how much you need empathy for the people that you work with as well. I think that's like such a strong negotiation tactic, because you're accomplishing things through others. You need to often, influence, and you need to kind of convince them. And I think by like really truly understanding them and kind of knowing what they were going through, I think a lot of times you can use that to more effectively get things done. So like we use that a lot with like our client success team, working with our operations team, working with engineers, just like really putting yourself in their shoes. And I think that just creates really effective relationships. I think another thing that I didn't realize, and maybe this is more of like an honest view of being a PM, is, as I mentioned, I'm super social. I think one thing I realized when I became a PM is that it's a bit of a lonely job sometimes, because often you are making these really big decisions, sometimes on your own. Often it's like you with like a lot of engineers that you're working with. So one thing I've realized is it can be a little bit like you're kind of this like lone ranger. So one thing I've really focused on at my work is creating like a PM culture and making sure that PMs have a way to interact with each other. But I think that's like one thing to keep in mind about the role and about the kind of work.
Yeah, like that's so like such an interesting insight, because I feel like as like a junior PM, like as like someone who did an internship, like I had to run all my decisions like through someone else, but like I can definitely like understand like my manager and like my skip manager probably made like a lot of other decisions that kind of like were like top down, so which like never got any insight into. So yeah, that's like really interesting. Like that's a really great insight to hear. So the next question is, what did your recruiting process look like? So I know some people transitioned into PM later on, some did it like right out of school. So I'll start off with Allison, since you went last time.
Yeah, so my interview process, so yeah, I don't think I mentioned this before, but I used to work at CIBC in kind of more of like a digital strategy role. So when I came to Wealthsimple, it was a bit of a transition for me. This was my first PM role, and I really had to like learn how to like translate those like more businessy skills into kind of like tech PM skills. It was a pretty long interview process. There were, I think, 4 interviews with a couple of case studies. And then the final round, because Wealthsimple was still pretty small at the time, there was like a founder interview at the very end. I would say, yeah, there were 2 case studies. One of them was kind of a more like on the spot, like joint whiteboarding session. The other one was a take home case study. But now I run a lot of interviews as well. We're doing a lot of hiring. And I would say one thing that we really look for as we hire PMs is we really want people who have like a very clear superpower. So like something that they are really good at, and like a way that they can level up our team, and a way that they can bring something super unique to the table. I think another thing we look for is really structured and logical thinking. So someone who can take a framework and kind of consistently apply that every time, no matter what the problem is like. And I think the last thing we also look for is, I think a lot of times people come with a solution to a problem, but I think what we look for is more so the ability to like define the problem and really like articulate it and like tease it apart. So we spend a lot of time in our interview process kind of testing those skills, but I think it's a pretty typical PM interview process.
Mm-hmm. I had a follow-up question. So you mentioned like superpowers, like what would that look like? Like I'm familiar with like the typical like PM interviews, but like what would be like attributes like that would be like a superpower?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think this is very dependent on on every person. I think it could be a couple of things. I think it could be like a very specific skill, or I think it could almost be like a trait. Like one thing that I brought to the table, because I came from a big company, and at the time Wealthsimple was really looking for to find these like enterprise partnerships to kind of expand our client base. So I kind of brought this, and I don't know if this is like really a superpower that I still have, but I had this like ability to like talk to big companies and like to kind of know how to communicate them and communicate with senior leadership. So I think a lot of my superpower was around like communication skills and almost like a sales like communication style. So I think it's like you just have to think about those times when you felt like really confident after a meeting, or when you like think you did something really well, and kind of like hone in on those themes within you. And I think you either need to just like straight up say like, this is my superpower, or just find like more indirect ways to communicate that in your interview process.
Yeah, for sure. I'll pass it off to Diane.
Sorry, the original question was recruiting, right?
What did your recruiting process look like?
Okay. Yeah. So I recruited kind of off cycle because of COVID. I graduated in December of 2020 instead of like typically June. I was doing my exchange and then it got screwed over. So I kind of didn't really have the regular kind of APM cycles that were going on. And a lot of them actually got canceled last year too. So it looked a little bit different for me. It's still kind of like the typical PM interviews that I did, like a lot of case studies, a lot of take homes. Some, like for example, Microsoft had like a technical round more so, and then a lot of it was more behaviorals and leadership, looking at your vision and your drive. My most recent round of recruiting that I did was less like new grad. It's like after kind of 1 year of working as a PM. So those actually the bar is a bit higher, but I would say it's even less competitive, to be honest, for the new grad programs, because a lot of the new grad programs only have like 5 or 6 spots, but there's so many graduates every single year. So I would say like even the full-time, even though you might have additional rounds, or they might be looking for significantly more when they ask you these like product strategy or product case questions, it's actually less competition that you have out there. But yeah, I haven't came across a really bizarre or atypical interview process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then passing it off to Monica.
For sure. So the Google APM process is also very standard. Like the product questions that they ask are very much out of the book, in my opinion. The way I transitioned into being a full-time APM was they have an APM internship program. So I can elaborate more on how that recruiting process is like. So there's several rounds. The first round is the resume screen, and then after the resume screen, there's the phone interview. The phone interview is usually a product question, and then after that is an on-site, and this on-site experience has like three interviews.
It's 3.
Yeah, 3
can
interviews plus
3.
three interviews plus a take-home assignment. The take-home assignment is like you write a doc where you put a slide deck on a problem that they usually have every year. And then in the 3 interviews, it's usually there's an analytical one and then 2 product ones. So very standard out of the box, but there are several parts to it.
Mm-hmm. And then Jason, what was your experience like transitioning into the product role?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty straightforward. I can go through it, but really phone screen, initial behavioral interview into a second broader behavioral interview into a case study and presentation. One thing that I didn't actually get, so I had the case study very directly focused on the product that I would have owned when I made the jump over to the Telus TV team. And what I think would have been probably a better showcasing of skills is to do that as well as a totally random product, just to test, how do you think about a very specific industry, but how do you think about an industry that we're kind of throwing you a curveball with? I think both of those would be useful for any PM to sort of prep for going in an interview. Not only how you think about a specific industry that you are interviewing for, but in general, like how do you approach a product strategy with a very new problem that might be set in front of you? So I'd be prepared for both of those things when starting up your interview process.
Mm-hmm. And then finally, Lisa.
A lot of great things have been said already, but I'll add in some, I guess, perspective from somebody who actually didn't do a lot of prep. So the story went is over the summer, I did probably like 50 hours of consulting mocks. Biggest regret of my life. I didn't go down that path. But I think when I went into sort of decided very last minute almost to transition to product, I was a little bit overwhelmed, to be honest, from the resources that was out there. If you ever Google, there's like a bazillion things you can do. And I'm like, okay, well, how many books do I have to read? Because there's like 20 recommended lists. So what I advise, something I could probably add is advising people who are maybe new to this industry or maybe haven't thought about it until very late, like myself, is honestly get yourself into some real mocks ASAP. There's a lot of great Slack channels, a lot of great communities out there. There's also a lot of great fellowship, there's like, I don't know, women in technology and things like that. Like speaking with people in the industry has been the most helpful by far in helping me actually prep for the interview and recruiting process. Sometimes like just reading a book, you don't really get a feel for what they're looking for in those product sense questions and etc. So that's like the first piece, like start practicing ASAP with people that can, especially people who have done product roles and they know like kind of have like that intuition as to how your answer could be improved, for example. I think the second piece is out of like the interviews I've done, like kind of like Jason, like I've been asked actually more questions that's relevant to the role. So for example, at my current company, they straight up just asked me about the company, but there's almost virtually no information on them and I was not prepared. So, if you're doing a company, you want to be prepared for general, like random questions, like, I don't know, make a dating app, as well as really knowing the product ahead of time in case they do ask you those questions. You want to show a certain level of research and preparation. I think that go a long way for any like more technical interviews.
Yeah, definitely a +1 to mocking as soon as possible, because I think I agree that the books are really overwhelming and they kind of give you a baseline knowledge about the expectations as to what going into the interview or like understanding like the types of questions. But I do think like mocking with people really helped me level up or like ramp up really quickly because, as you mentioned, people who have been in the position or like are working as a bit more senior PMs, they know, they have the intuition, they know what to look for, and like they're able to give the most like constructive feedback that really helps you iterate quickly, which is like what you want to do in general, like iteration and like learning, fail fast, break fast, and learn quickly from that. So yeah, I agree with everything that's like been shared. And then the next question is, what did your past experiences look like leading up to the role that you have now? And like, how has the work/projects differed in your past role? Okay, there's a lot of parts to this question. So the first piece is, how did your past experiences build up to the role that you currently have? So like, how did your past experiences contribute to that? And then I know some of you all had past different roles in the past, like some as like engineers, some as consultants. So like, how did that role differ from your current one in terms of like what were some core differences in your previous role to your current role? A loaded question. Does anyone want to take that first? I'm gonna pop. Okay.
I can start off. Yeah, I think someone, it might have been Diane, that mentioned that she was looking for her internships to figure out what she hated about certain jobs. And so when I started off as a software engineer, just as an intern, like I realized that I didn't love programming and I didn't love just sort of the focus and like focus individually that you needed to do to get the job done. A lot of the time I realized that I liked interacting with more people, and so that's why I went into consulting. And when I was in consulting, I realized that I love the work itself, but the projects are a bit hit or miss in terms of who the clients are, what industry you're working in. And I told myself, like, I want to work in a more fast-paced industry, and everything was leading me towards working back again in tech. And so I think that the experience from a technical perspective on the internships set me up for success going into product, and the experience with that like professional layer and communication layer and working all hours and working with all types of people aspect of consulting kind of meshed together really nice to build a skill set for a product manager. And then from there it was a bit of learning on the job to fill all those gaps that the first two types of roles left. And that's kind of all you can do is take the skills that you develop at the previous roles and just be really ready to learn when you inevitably come up across a problem that you're not quite sure how to solve. It's really just that learning and being open to asking for help when you do land that role.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll hand it off to Diane.
Literally, Jason already spoke for me, but I think like just to add on a little bit, I think for me, like I had kind of like not a conventional resume even when I was applying as a new grad, because I didn't have engineering or PM internships when I applied. Like a lot of people might already have like layered and set the foundation for because they're super smart, but I didn't do it. I just like went like this, zigzagging. But I think it's important to kind of present yourself as a way where all the skills are transferable, which I think Jason touched up on too. Like for example, for me, before I had my PM internships, I had a ton of random jobs and projects that I worked on, but I always tried to find a way to link them back to when I interviewed as a core skill or a superpower, that a PM could have, whether that be like overcoming ambiguity or like working with very little data or trying to convince a whole team to back your idea when, everyone disagrees, like conflicts and things. So yeah, I think for me, I didn't really have a typical kind of PM skills developed through that, but I still try to find it in what I did get to do.
Mm-hmm. And like, would you say that like your past experiences like would be a composition of like clubs, extracurriculars, and like job experience? Like I know that a lot of people always mention like, or like at least when I was networking, like they'd be like, oh, it'd be really nice if you had like professional experience, but do you think that like other things also would weigh heavily on your resume too beyond that?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think you just have to, doing mocks is a great way to learn how to frame what you did in a way that is most applicable in a PM setting. It's all, you did the work, but now you need to also sell yourself. So you need to sell it in the product management way in your interviews. And sometimes it really is about how you say it. But I think everything is relevant and everything is applicable, especially extracurriculars, projects, or even open source things you've contributed to. Yeah, I think they're very, very useful. And especially as new grads, like interviewers understand that you're coming straight out of school. And the expectation isn't that you're coming, as a seasoned product manager. They rather have someone who it can be a generalist, and it shows that you're inherently curious about like a lot around you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Lisa, would love your thoughts on this.
Honestly, great points from the both of you so far. I think what I could add to that, because, at the end of the day, you guys are all like coming up either looking for an internship or a new grad. It's really when I reflected on my experience and when I was sort of tailoring my resume and my sort of overall personal branding into more product, I realized a lot more experience than I thought that wasn't relevant to product was actually very much applicable. So just to give a small example, I worked at just a SaaS startup once, and weird enough, I don't even remember that experience when I was applying. But when I was truly reflecting on the key components of product, I realized I actually developed the feature there. I did user interviews. The role wasn't called product. It was just like a business development intern. But I actually went through the cycle of user interviews and et cetera, et cetera. And I was quite surprised because I realized I'm like, oh, wow, like a lot of what you do, whether you're doing a software role or a regular business analytics internship, et cetera, you have these components, whether it's leadership or strategy or data analytics that are really applicable. So really hone in on those specific skills. You only have like, I don't know, a page for your resume. You only have that little time, 30-minute for behavioral interview. So focus on what's actually important and present yourself as someone who they think will grow from associate PM to PM, et cetera, and that they find you as a perfect match for their company to really raise. So don't be afraid to think that you might not be qualified just because you don't have a product internship, but really talk to some people who are in the industry. Ask them like, okay, what are the most successful, like what does success look like in your company? What does success look like in your role? And take those components and reflect on your own experiences and then really highlight those things.
So many fire things being said. I just want to give like snaps. I'm gonna hand it off to Allison. Sorry, these are all like such great advice that like I wish I knew when I was recruiting.
Yeah, I don't know if I have much to add on top of there. I think one thing I would say is, yeah, I'd say kind of like the attitude is the most transferable thing from what I've seen. Like, I think when we hire, we look for people who are like really like optimistic or like really curious or like really ambitious. And I think these are like durable traits that like, as long as you're that kind of person, regardless of whether you're in a PM role or in another role trying to get into PM, I think those are the things that will make you successful. Like, I think, yeah, if as a PM, you have to be super optimistic. Like if things aren't going well, you kind of need to like find that path through and get your team to be really excited about it too. I think if you're curious, you'll figure out the answer. And I think it's that mindset that really will help you become a PM and be a really good PM. So that's the only thing I would add there. And empathy, I definitely agree with that.
Mm-hmm. And then finally, Monica, anything to add?
Yeah. Okay. I guess in terms of like my past experiences, I also was very similar to Diane in the sense that try to diversify as much as possible and never return to the same role or company. And in those past experiences, I tried out software engineering, but mostly I was like doing backend infra stuff. So I was going like big build, woo. But because I was an infra person, like I never worked with a PM, but I think that taught me like just what it means to have like a solid backend and how to just talk to engineers in general. Always find it a lot easier to talk to like the engineering people as opposed to design people. Just a personal thing. When I was doing like a consultant-ish type role, that was like my first time dealing with like external facing people. So I learned how to like push back, which is like, I think a really cool skill to have as a PM. And I also tried doing like PMing for like a nonprofit. So that was like UW Blueprint. And that was also really interesting because the nonprofit space is just really unique. Yeah, simply because, you know, tech debt and all that sort of thing. But I think the main takeaway though is that you can literally get product experience from doing anything. Like I've seen PMs like, or people transition into a product from being like a salesperson. And then that way you like learn how to sell a product, you learn how to like talk to people. And I've also seen like people who are like senior PMs now who start off as like a Starbucks barista. And that's also like, you know, how do I talk to people? How do I like assess their needs? How do I make sure I have like these good conversations and like make the customer happy? So I think that's like something really interesting about product management. Like you can be who you want to be, but think about it in a product way and yeah, develop product-like skills.
I love that. I love the just like anyone can break into product because like definitely I feel like I felt very intimidated when I first was trying to get in just because again like limited roles, just like supply and demand was very scary, but I really appreciate kind of that advice. So we have 2 more questions. I think I will ask. Okay, so so this is gonna, I guess like we can answer this in like really quickly, but what type of resources like books or articles would you recommend people who are interested in PM and to gain a better sense of the role? Like we talked a bit about the misconceptions that you all initially had about the role, but like if someone is interested in gaining a bit more insight, like what would you say are the best resources to learn more about the role itself? Or like, yeah, just because I do think, again, like lots of misconceptions surrounding PM. Or like, is there any resources or is it just talking to someone is the best way to learn what PM is, which I think is the best option, but would love to hear anyone's thoughts. You can just unmute popcorn style.
Isn't there like 2 main books everyone recommend, like Decode and Conquer and then Cracking the PM Interview?
Decode and Conquer is for mock interviewing. So like all of it is just like PM interview questions, like example question and answers.
So yes, I don't know. I didn't read either book, but those
no,
are
I don't think
again and again.
It's a pure like interview prep type book.
I see.
Yeah, I'd say like Cracking the PM Interview might give a bit of insight, but but it is pretty hefty in terms of the prep stuff.
I think a maybe unconventional thing to say is you can try to get some product experience, even just from whether pro bono work, etc. I think it's a Monica that brought up how she did like a variety of like product related experience, some of which are pro bono. Actually, myself included. It was kind of just like a pro bono role, and I was with the team, and we worked with this really cool startup, and they wanted us to sort of work on a product expansion project, and just having that realistic practice on problem solving and how to think and start developing some product intuition would be really helpful. So whether it's your school, I'm sure every school has those like tech clubs, or I don't know, like those kind of things, like look for those opportunities. And oftentimes they have programs where you're able to practice in a real life setting instead of just, doing very theoretical stuff.
And I think, Monica, you had something to add there.
Oh yeah, just really quickly, another unconventional thing that you just can't find online. I just personally really like watching TikToks and learning from TikTok. I think, 7-second videos, great stuff. You can learn so much in just 7 seconds or more. But personally, I've like never done like a design role, for example, but I somehow ended up on like design talk. And I've learned a lot more about like UX design through watching TikToks, which has been pretty cool.
But yeah, so essentially just like trying to gain hands-on experience, like maybe through like just having that kind of ownership in a product, and like TikTok, a lot of information. TikTok is so powerful. Like short form content is such a big deal nowadays. Like it's crazy how much you can communicate in like the 30-second window that you have on TikTok. Okay, and then now we're gonna transition into questions asked by people who are here. I can't English. So sorry, recollecting myself. Actually had one more question before. So like, I know we hovered a lot around kind of recruiting, a bit of like understanding what PM is. So what advice would you give students looking to break into PM? I'll pass that off to Jason.
I guess you're here, so that's a good start. I think there's no one answer that you should do this thing. Like some people are going to read the books, some people are going to do the prep
workshop thing, but
or do workshops. I think I heard someone say do workshops, but I don't think there's any one right answer. I just say take a look at what products you would actually like to work on and have some sort of personal experience in. I find that having that personal experience and that relationship with the product that you would be working on or the industry you're working in is probably what's going to set you apart from other people if you are passionate about that space, or at the very least have done your research for the work in that space. So that's the one bit of vague overarching advice that I'd give.
Mm-hmm. So like, I know like some of y'all came from a non-technical background. So like in terms of that perspective, like what would you recommend? I think Diane is from business school. And then yes. I can't tell if I think Allison is also business background. So like what are some insights there? Like kind of breaking in with a non-technical background.
Yeah, I can go first if Allison is okay. Okay, cool. Yeah, I think there's so much to cover, but I think one for me is just really before you start kind of following the crowd, because it's very easy to, get swept into the PM wave and start applying for these APM programs, the FANG companies, or I guess, what is it, Manga now?
Oh, yeah.
What was my point? Yeah, like before all of that, like I think you should understand you as a person, what you want to optimize for going into recruiting. For example, I think as like younger PMs are, like my manager told me this, which I think is really valid, is you should look to optimize your growth and also your mentorship and coaching at the company, which I think a lot of people may not put as much emphasis on in place of, company brand or prestige or some sort of APM program competitiveness. But when you are interviewing, it's a great way to know your own worth too, right? Like you're just not there because you want to be there, like they also want you to. So really take that time to get to know the team that you're interviewing with and who is going to be your direct manager, because that's going to impact your career for the long term, especially as a junior PM. And so I think that's one thing that I neglected going into recruiting as a new grad. So make sure you optimize for what you want in your future. And that might be, a specific company brand just to get you off in the right foot step or whatever. But just make sure you know that before you get swept into what everyone else is doing.
Mm-hmm. And Allison?
Yeah, I think one thing I would say is maybe like don't sweat it. Like if you don't get an APM role, I don't think it's the end of the world. I think one thing we just talked about here is how being a PM is so multifaceted and how there are like so many different backgrounds that can lead to becoming a PM. Like I became a PM much later in life. I remember when I was in business school, I was like devastated because I didn't get this one internship that I wanted. And I thought like the rest of my life was over. But I think you realize that you can pivot and you have like the rest of your career to become a PM or to do what you want to do. So I think just, find something you're excited about. I think regardless of what your first job is, you will learn something that you can eventually apply to being a PM. So I'd say, if you don't get that APM role, I think companies are now increasingly hiring PMs from different backgrounds. So I don't think it's a big deal.
And then like kind of just like, I think all of us come from like a business / technical background, which I think has a lot of like transferable knowledge and skill, like just through like coursework. But if someone were to come in from like a science background or just like non-tech, non-business adjacent, like what would be some recommendations that you would have to kind of break in or like to enter PM? Like I know we discussed a little bit about just trying to gain that experience through extracurriculars, like through nonprofit work, but like what are other ways to build up some of those like soft PM skills that we discussed?
So I actually have one. Sorry to jump again, but because I actually come from like arts background, I did like music all my life, and then I actually did an arts program 4 years in high school. So I was actually going to study that in college. So I didn't really know what the heck I was doing. But I think a really great way is actually to make yourself the resource for other people. So we spoke a lot about reading and what books and resources are out there, but why not learn it yourself and push yourself? So what I did actually really early on to learn more about tech and about the opportunities and the trends is like starting a Medium and pushing myself to write articles, feeling comfortable enough about technical subjects or topics so that I could write about them, about a certain industry that I'm curious about. And it's actually a great way for you to network and get people to, give you some attention for jobs and connections later on as well. So I think that's a great way, regardless of your background. You can push yourself to learn all these things to a point where you're comfortable enough to formulate an opinion and then share it.
Wow, like that's a really tactical way of like familiarizing yourself with the tech space. So that's like really interesting. And then now the next question is, what product, this is from one of the audience members. So what product decisions have you made at your companies and what were their respective impacts? So this is like pretty open-ended. I'll hand it off to Monica.
Can I get a moment to think about this? Does anyone else want to step in first?
I feel like it's kind of hard to like reflect on your work, especially like when you're in it like day to day. Like it's so hard to do like a retrospective of like, oh, what did I actually do? And like, what was the impact? Because I feel like a lot of stuff is going on an ongoing basis. I'm like, do you ever really wrap up a project? That's my question.
Yeah. Also, I just started like 2 months ago, so still ramping up, but just thought of something. So one of the product that I'm managing is My Activity. So if you go to myactivity.google.com, it's like a curated history of all the interactions that you've had with Google products that you enable tracking for. So right now we're trying to like roll out this new UI to My Activity that will improve usability and just general sentiment trust towards Google. And our goal is to promote transparency and control over like the data that users have. So when users delete the data, they know that the data is actually being deleted. None of this data is going to be used for any type of ads personalization or recommendation. So this new UI, the previous PM on the team spent a lot of research it has like proven results and it has launched towards the search product. But my role is to create like a launch plan. So it's a very execution heavy project to roll it out to all the other products at Google in a smart way that does not involve too much like bottlenecking, because sometimes you're blocked on like the UX writer trying to create text, or sometimes you're blocked on like the designer trying to come up with designs for a specific use case. So what is like the best way to roll out this like inherently good UI improvement to other products? So coming up with that launch plan and then executing that is what I've been working on. So that was something really cool and more execution heavy, that will have hopefully good impact on our users.
Yeah, and I'm gonna pass it off to Lisa.
So I'm also fairly new because I was a graduate 2021, but something that does come to mind, and this I'm gonna try to, it's like supply chain stuff. It's just like hard to explain and elaborate, but essentially something I felt really impactful was, so I work with like CPGs, like think, I don't know, like Tide's parent company, Procter & Gamble, like Mars, L'Oreal, things like that, right?
What does CPG mean?
Oh, sorry, consumer packaged good companies.
Okay.
Yeah, so they put a lot of pressure on their suppliers. And this comes back to the idea of like really knowing and empathizing with your customers. So not to talk badly about our clients, but they give a lot of unreasonable kind of like, for example, like, oh, let's say like I want 5,000 box of candy in like 2 weeks. And there's a lot of like data that they give sort of to their suppliers that it's hard for them to interpret in their system. So I think having really chatted with the people that work in that space, and they don't have a lot of say like power, myself in product, I think I could really try to, understand their problems. And then the things that we've done in sort of making and replacing some manual labor, you could see the improvements, because you can see like through like user testing and things like that, the improvement in time. Like maybe before they were going through the spreadsheet for 2 hours on a Monday morning every day, and then now they don't have to. And I think that piece of it I find really helpful, like making other people's jobs easier just gives me a lot of joy when you're following up with them and talking about how the product has impacted their experience.
Mm-hmm. And then Jason, do you have an experience that you can recall where you had to make a decision, and what was the impact?
Yeah, I was trying to think of like a very specific, easy to explain thing, and I think I have one.
Okay.
We were running a grassroots esports event. If people are familiar with the video game Rocket League, it's like soccer but with cars. And the whole purpose of that was to show that Telus is involved in gaming. Telus doesn't just want to slap a label onto something and call it Telus branded. We actually want to be a part of the esports industry. And so the tiny decision that we made was, okay, we're doing this and not really trying to promote Telus, but at the same time, we're trying to promote Telus and sell some product. So the decision was, where do we put any sort of upsell or cross-sell or any sort of actual conversion layer in the sign-up process? And the final decision that we made was, you know what, this is a super important thing. Let's put it right on the registration page, but make it an opt-in button to say, yes, I would like to be contacted about offers and yada, yada, yada. So that's my very, very tiny decision to put it right front and center on the registration page for this free esports tournament. And that converted to, I'm trying to remember the figure off the top of my head, something like $700,000 in EBITDA just from that one tournament. So really small decision to say, yes, we do want to promote Telus products and services, and we want to promote it really loud, right front and center to everyone that signs up for this thing. And you can see the direct conversion to, yes, everyone that clicked that link translated to about $750,000 in EBITDA. So yeah, that was the one decision that led to that impact. So I found the very, very specific thing to share.
I love that. Like, I think that's something that's so like great about PM is the impact you see when something actually gets launched, and like after going through such like I'd say thorough decision-making process, like to see that outcome is like so rewarding. So we have one more question, which is someone asked earlier, which was, I think Lisa and Diane spoke about being a non-technical person. So the person is curious how you manage to work on technical teams or with technical people when you're from a business background? Like, how do you communicate with engineers? How do you gain that context to like communicate maybe like ideas to technical requirements? Like, what was that process like? Or like, how did you gain that fluency?
I think I can take on this first, because currently my team is, the projects we're doing is really technical. I work directly with our chief solutions architect, and we're building something like net new. And there's a lot of like solutions architecture stuff, like the flowcharts. I have no idea to this day. I'm like, I look at it, I had no idea what's happening. I could ask a million questions, I still don't get it. I think that creates a lot of imposter syndrome, to be honest. I think one of the most stressful part of my job is like there's just a lot of like technical tickets, a lot of like for example, these 2 weeks we had a go live, and then there's a huge like hypercare, and there's huge like a lot of technical like troubleshooting I have to do, and I have to do a little bit of coding, which I'm like with absolutely like very minimal like coding intuition. But I think the best advice I would give to anybody is like, in a new role, first of all, don't be afraid, because you definitely succeed in your role. Your team wants you to succeed, and they will help support you in that piece. And so some of the approaches I personally took, the easy one is like actually just asking people, devs on your team for help. I know people on my team, like product managers, that would have like weekly, like learn how to code with devs, for example. For myself, I genuinely just pulled a couple of people in before a couple like technical demos. I'm like, hey, listen, I'm struggling like so much on this. Let's go through step by step. So leverage your team, build that connection, get that social capital first, but then leverage your team to help you problem solve. And as well as just know that, being in the PM space, you get to make a lot of decisions, but you don't have a lot of authority. So make sure that you get buy-in with others. So I find one way to really great to do that is like, if I want to convince the engineering team of something and they might be hesitant, work together with them on creating that solution. So give ownership to them. And in that sense, they help you with a lot of supporting you in that technical decision making. And so it kind of is a win-win situation. The long-winded answer narrowed into a summary is if you're a very technical role, be open to learning, like take some courses. It definitely helped. And I actually did this random kind of like a pseudo software internship just to know a little bit of the struggles of like coding, just to empathize with the developers. So never stop like really pushing yourself in that direction, even if like, I don't know, like you are like myself and you suck at coding, you definitely didn't took 16 hours debugging one thing that somebody could have done in an hour. But yeah, anyways, like push yourself in the direction that you feel most uncomfortable in, and eventually you'll get there. You just pick up technical stuff as you go.
Mm-hmm. And Diane, to wrap this up.
I literally have nothing to add. Like Lisa just said everything. One thing that I always do try to do is like keep it fun, light. It is about like two-way respect and formulating a relationship. No engineering manager is going to be like, oh my God, like it's new PM, like let's sink the ship. Like, I hope they fail. Like, I hope they get fired. Like, no, like they want, everyone on the team wants to succeed too. So, there are no stupid questions. I'm always super open about what I don't know and what I know. And I think if you work in that kind of environment, you also open the door for them to ask you questions, because it's also true that they have some questions for you too about the business side of things that they might not know. And once you're transparent about learning from them, they also feel like in the same way, they can gain that respect from you by you also teaching them as well. And I also find that especially when you're ramping up with new teams, like take that time to get to know everyone, even if you have a lot of engineers, like get to know what their goals are, what they want to achieve, what they like to see, and what they like to work on, and get to know them on a more personal level, on a one-on-one basis, even, because nobody's going to say that in team chats. It's all just going to be groupthink and, oh my God, the PM's idea is great, and nobody's going to push back. But when you get to know people on one-on-one, then you can really guide the team and keep that in mind and empathize with them when you do plan your roadmap or make certain decisions, like always having, like literally protecting your team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So I know that we're 2 minutes over 9. I will hand it back off to Alyssa and Justin to